Well, hello everyone. It's Robert back. Wanted to share a few things from, I call them gems from out of my vault, but there's some of the nice old country music that I really love. So I wanted to share a few things that maybe I haven't before. So anyway, I'll start with a Red Sabine release from the early 50s. It's on the Old Yellow and MGM album. My favorite on this was The Intoxicated Rat. Also featured Sundown Sue, Please Don't Let Me Love You, and You Taught Me How. Red Savant recorded in a country honky-tonk style in the 50s, the fiddle and steel. He was noted in the 60s for truck driver recitations, but this is getting some of that earlier Red Savine sound. And Bear Family actually did a nice job on a CD releasing some of his MGM and Decca recordings from the 50s. So very nice release there. From the 50s, mid 50s, this came this album, Just Imagination. That's the old Webb Pierce sound. The interesting thing about this album is none of these songs really were hits. In fact, none of these songs made it to singles. But Decca in the mid 50s took some of these, they put them out on an LP. And I Love You Dear, Just Imagination, I Found a True Love, New Love Affair. That's all that classic honky tonk Webb Pierce 50s sound. And then going back to the 20s, County did a nice job, and also so did Rounder, on releasing some of the old Gid Tanner and the Skillet Lickers recordings. They were a band put together in the studio back in the 20s. They recorded from the mid-20s to the early 30s. They featured fiddle playing with Gid Tanner, Clayton McMitchen. Raleigh Puckett was their singer, and Fate Norris played the banjo in their band. And just nice recordings, Soldier's Joy, Leather Britches, Molly Put the Kettle On, 4 Cent Cotton. It's nice. It's a good listen today. So, and I love Skillet Lickers music. Fine album of them. And then we got Marty Stuart. Of course, he's still popular today. This is a little bit earlier work by him. This came out in the 80s. It's much like a jam session type LP. Johnny Cash and Earl Scruggs and Doc Watson, Merle Watson, Jerry Douglas all join in. Nice recordings of Busy Bay Cafe, One More Ride, and Hey Porter, Down the Road, and others. It's right before his hillbilly rock phase. It's a nice early Marty Stuart work. And then talking about Stuart, this is no relation, but the Stuart Family was a group that recorded in the early 50s for the Gilt Edge people. King acquired those recordings. They released this album in the early 60s. Very tough to get. Just Out of Reach was perhaps their most popular song, one they wrote, and that's been recorded by a lot of people, even in the R&B field. But this had Don't Go Honky Tonkin', Mysteries of Life, Sugar Stealin' Baby, Lonesome Dollar Bill. So it's like a mixture of a honky tonk sound and kind of old timey. It's kind of mixed in there. So a nice album, not one to really pass up. You might be surprised how much you like it if you hear any of the Stewart family recordings. And then we have Jimmy Dean. Jimmy Dean, of course, noted for Big Bad John. In the early and mid-50s, again, he recorded a honky-tonk sound, fiddle, steel guitar at the time. Freight Train Blues is on this album. This was on Mercury. He had recorded for 4-Star prior. Also features a few when he first went over to Nashville Sound. But some nice early Jimmy Dean on this album. And speaking of Jimmy Dean, on his television show, he featured some good bluegrass music, top quality, with Buck Ryan. It was his fiddle player. Had been his fiddle player as part of his band. And also, in his own right, he recorded with a banjo player named Smitty Irvin. This was an album they released in the mid-60s. Big highlight is Kansas City Railroad Blues, featuring Buck Ryan's good fiddle playing. Smitty Irvin was a good singer. Tragic Romance and Sleepy Eyed John and others were the things that they did. Interestingly, in the picture, the guitar player you see is Bill Harrell. Bill Harrell used him as part of his band, the Virginians, and he also made a nice album at the same time on the United Artists label, featuring their work as well. One of the earlier Patsy Cline albums, before seemed like albums were being released, The Death of Her. This was released right after her death, actually. It featured Crazy Dreams and There He Goes, Lovin' in Vain, and Shoes, recordings that hadn't been on LP yet. This came out shortly, again, as I said, after she died. That's How Heartache Begins. From 1959 came this album, Johnny Horton Makes History. Kind of a Ginchy picture on there. Well, some nice recordings. His version of Jim Bridger, Comanche. Of course, Battle of New Orleans, Battle of Bull Run, Sinking of the Reuben James, Johnny Reb, St. the Bismarck. So it's a very, very listenable album of his popular sound at the time. Now, Jimmie Rodgers was one that RCA went into in the 50s and early 60s, releasing all of his recorded work just about. This was an album they released in 62. Country Music Hall of Fame. He had been elected to the Country Music Hall of Fame shortly before. This featured Roll On Kentucky Moon, I'm Free from the Chain Gang Now, Mississippi River Blues, and my favorite one here was TB Blues. Nice Jimmie Rodgers album. Also his first recording, Soldier's Sweetheart, was released on here. Now, one of the ones who drew a lot of inspiration from Jimmie Rodgers was Hank Snow. Top quality album here of his country guitar. This features his Rainbow Ranch Boys, features a number of fast numbers like Wabash Blues, 12th Street Rag, Rainbow Boogie, and Grandfather's Clock, Madison Madness. Nice overdubbing from him on a recording of The Lover's Farewell. You get that classic 50s Hank Snow sound on this album. And then one of the later Flatt and Scruggs album, The Fabulous Sound of Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs. This is before the phase in the late 60s where they were doing Bob Dylan songs and songs of that sort. This was still the classic Foggy Mountain Boys sound. One of the last albums just to feature the earlier sound without the addition of some of the extra instruments like Charlie McCoy's harmonica. This featured a fine version of The Train That Carried My Girl from Town, Earl Scruggs' guitar masterpiece of Georgia Buck, their versions of Hello Stranger, Amber Tresses Tied in Blue, Bumming an Old Freight Train. This is a solid Flatt and Scruggs album. One that you may not hear as much about, but just please give this a listen. This is good stuff here. And then finally, in the background, if you can hear, we got one of the earlier Stonewall Jackson albums. This came out in '61. Featured One Look at Heaven and Greener Pastures and Second Choice and Leona. So that's what we got playing now, a little bit earlier Stonewall Jackson. And then finally, just thought I'd bring out a few of my EPs. Don't get a chance to show them too much. But I thought I'd just share just a few briefly with you. One of the older Sun, Johnny Cash EPs, featured Big River and Home of the Blues. One of the early Tennessee Ernie Ford, one of the early Capitol EPs, featured his version of Shotgun Boogie and Smoky Mountain Boogie, Anticipation Blues, and Blackberry Boogie was on this. And then nice Don Gibson. Don Gibson was popular on RCA in the late 50s. So as he got popular, then Columbia released a few songs on a Columbia EP. Nice version of No Shoulder to Cry On. Interestingly, on some of his Columbia recordings, his fiddle player was Kenny Baker. Kenny Baker was also known later on in playing with Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys. So nice early material from Don Gibson on this. And then finally, Lefty Frizzell. He had recorded some Jimmie Rodgers songs in '51. He went back in the studio in '53 and recorded 4 more, and they made it to this EP rather at the time. So that's what I have for today. Hope you enjoyed that, and hope it kind of causes you maybe to search and look at some of these. You can find some of the things on the internet or some of the recordings, or maybe get into them a little more. But I always enjoy sharing them, and believe me, I love the music. I play it. So anyway, I've enjoyed sharing these with you, and I will look forward to seeing you again sometime soon, and we'll kind of let Stonewall Jackson take us on out of here. So long for now.
Out loud, but oh, how I miss someone not being with the crowd. Yet nobody knew I was crying. Tears in my